Hello and welcome to the fourth in the lecture series, Russia's War Against Ukraine. Today we'll be talking about Russia's geopolitics obsession. In week one we talked about political technology and how in Russia it's weaponized many subsidiary pseudosciences. It determines how Russia talks about empire, how Russia talks about Ukraine. Today, how Russia talks about, balderizes, weaponizes geopolitics, but also elevates geopolitics to this kind of national, obsessional pseudoscience. Here's what the Russian commentator Sergei Medvedev says. In post-Soviet Russia, with its virgin political thought, geopolitics became the ruling science, the refuge of provincial teachers of Marxism, infantry philosophers and simple charlatans, covering the deficit of humanitarian understanding with deceptively slender theories similar to the conspirology dear to the Russian heart. Magical terms like Eurasia and Heartland, more about them in a minute, replaced for the ruling class a critical view of the external world, suggesting instead messianic myths and simulacra for the pursuit of national interests and the struggle for resources. This is in a book originally in Russian, now, as you can see, available in English too. So geopolitics is a kind of pseudoscience, but a very popular one. Go to any Russian bookshop and it's full of big volumes on geopolitics. So out of the classical theories and theorists of geopolitics, Russian technologized geopolitics selectively uses what are actually in origin quite controversial theories anyway. A lot of it is based on the thought of Nazi philosopher Carl Schmitt, who in this biography is called A Dangerous Mind. I don't mean Nazi metaphorically. Schmitt was a member of the Nazi party and never really renounced his views during his long life after 1945. If you're interested, this excellent other book, Russia's New Authoritarianism, goes into his intellectual influence on modern Russia in much more detail. So according to Carl Schmitt, the world was divided into, in German, Großräume, big spaces, what Russian thinkers tend to call civilizations. So this map is by one of them, Alexander Dugin. It's in Russian, but the purple zone, for example, is the Eurasian pole or civilization, centered on Russia. The brown, the European zone. The black, the North American pole, and so on. So the world is divided into these big spaces. Alternatively, another geopolitical theorist, Vadim Tsimbursky, depicted Russia's civilization space as almost an island, albeit with what he called a kind of limitrophe, a kind of transitional space around its edges. Moreover, Russia's civilization, or Großraum, big space, is the most important in Russocentric thinking. Here, modern Russians like to quote the British geopolitician Halford Mackinder, because he wrote that the Russian Großraum, or civilization, was the most important. It was what he called the Heartland, the key to control of Eurasia, and once you had control of that landmass, world power. Moreover, there was a difference between land power located in Eurasia and the so-called sea powers, much more imperialistic and fly-by-night, like Britain and then its successor, America. So famously, Mackinder wrote, he who controls the heartland and then the rimland, as you see this kind of outer zone towards the sea powers, controls the world. Power moves in and out of Eurasia. Zbigniew Brzezinski drew this famous diagram in the 90s about the collapse of Eurasian power, how the Western powers were gradually encroaching on Russia. Russia sees the world very much in opposite terms, or at least has come to see the world in opposite terms. That instead of the sea powers encroaching in on Russia, the land power projects its power out into the rimlands and ultimately to challenge the dominance of those sea powers globally. So in this book by Dugin, very influential, Foundations of Geopolitics, 1997, you start with, again in Russian, the Soviet space, which he calls Rossiya, the Eurasian Empire, which naturally controls Zone 1 in Europe. So that's actually more than former Soviet space. It basically includes all Orthodox countries in Europe, as opposed to Zone 2, Germany, and Zone 3, the sea powers, the UK in particular. Or for modern political commentator, geopolitician Peter Zeihan, Russia needs to control the in and out access points to what he calls the Heartlands, his term for Eurasia. And in the boundaries that it had in 1991, to which it was reduced after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia had only 2 out of 9 of these points. Crimea would give it 3. If you see the blue arrows, these are the access points in and out of the Heartland. So in this map, if you see it's centered on the North Pole and on Russia, Russia's role is to break out in what is here called a counter-encirclement strategy to challenge the power of the sea powers globally. Through those rimlands. This is Russia's imaginary war against what it calls the collective West. Here you see in this rather crude cartoon, Russia in alliance with China, challenging the many-headed beast of the G20, the global power of America and the dollar, its financial, military power. So many times recently, Putin has used this phrase about the collective West and how it is collectively, historically, always challenging Russia. We are forced again and again to repulse the aggression of the collective West. Or even more dramatically, in the kind of transposition of history that we have referred to, particularly in week 1, telekiller, political commentator Dmitry Kiselyov, rewriting history to say, back then, 80 years ago, it was in Stalingrad that we beat back the onslaught of the collective West against our country. All of Europe was on the side of fascist Germany. Now, Putin is not blatantly rewriting history in this sense, if you look. But Kiselyov is turning the war of Nazi Germany against the Soviet Union into a war of the collective West, which Russia is now replaying. The Great Patriotic War as what many commentators call the Little Patriotic War, a kind of version of World War II against Ukraine. Russian media space is full of geopolitical fantasies about victory and how Ukraine will be divided up. Here's one map from former President Dmitry Medvedev. Russia will expand, taking all of the zones in red. Crimea, but most of eastern, southern Ukraine. Assuming that all powers think in the same way, Poland and Romania also get bits of Ukraine. Although rather strangely, in Medvedev's proposal, Kiev is left as somehow a residual independent Ukraine. Not doing his homework, typically. This, though, has a long tradition going back to works by Dugin and others in the 90s. This again is from Dugin's notorious book, Foundations of Geopolitics. The fate of Ukraine, he argues, will be to be divided up. And if you can see the detail, Crimea and most of southern Ukraine go to Russia, only the west into the Central European big space. This is in Russian, but if you see the outline of Ukraine, again, a fantasy about how Ukraine can be divided up into various subcomponents. So back to Schmitt and his idea of the big space to explain a bit more what's driving Russia's geopolitics. First of all, you have the Großraum, or the big space, the civilization. Each civilization has its characteristic order, or nomos, created by the hegemon, the dominant power within that civilizational big space. Russia within its space, Germany within Central Europe, America within the collective West, etc. So the hegemonic powers have full sovereignty because it is their job to act as ordering powers and policemen within their Großraum or civilizational space. They are equal to each other, but they are superior to the limited sovereignty states that exist on the periphery of their civilizational space. And it is the job of the hegemonic power to order the space by centering it on a mission, a great political idea, so writes Schmitt. And because that is organic to the civilizational space, the hegemonic powers, when they police that space, keep out other powers who misunderstand and will only disrupt that space. In Carl Schmitt's version of the world, these are raumfremde Mächte, external powers, enemies of the local space. So again, hegemony is the attribute of the central power within the space, Russia within its civilization. All other states only have nominal sovereignty and are inferior to the hegemonic power. So this is my attempt to kind of conceptualize that. So you have Großraum A, which could be Central Europe, Großraum B, centered on Russia. So in A, you have a hegemon, say Germany. In B, you have a hegemon, Russia. And within Russia's space, Russia is superior to the limited sovereignty states around it. Just as in Schmitt's argument, Germany was superior to the limited sovereignty states around it in Central Europe. And that was, to spell out the obvious, Schmitt's gift to Nazi military ambitions in Central Europe. His intellectual justification for Germany riding rough over the limited sovereignty of its neighbours. Exactly, arguably, like Russia today. Vladislav Surkov, key political technologist, here you have him next to Putin, adds that only hegemons have true sovereignty, what he calls konkurentno sposobnost, long compound Russian word, which basically means ability to compete. Right? Hegemons are hegemonic because they are powerful. Sovereignty is not natural, it has to be earned. And weak, limited sovereignty states are in fact a danger to world order because of their inherent weakness and their tendency to drag in these raumfremde Mächte these alien powers into the civilizational space. Hopefully not too long-winded, but if there is this parallel between Nazi thinking and Russian geopolitical thinking, the implications are clear and pretty scary. Here is Putin on the eve of invasion, 21st of February 2022, saying explicitly, Ukraine actually never had stable traditions of real statehood. Right? It's not possessed of konkurentnosposobnost. Therefore, in 1991, it opted for mindlessly emulating foreign models, pulling in these Raumfremde Mächte, external interfering foreign powers. So, second long quote, but ends in Ukraine reverently accommodating the geopolitical rivals of Russia, dragging in America and other alien powers. True sovereignty of Ukraine, says Putin, is possible only in partnership with Russia. Partnership, but not a partnership of equals. Ukraine is this limited sovereignty state which must be under the authority of the hegemonic power. When Russia was proposing a new adjusted European security order in the build-up to the invasion, February 2022, this is what it proposed. And look how radical Russia's proposals actually were, and how they were very much based on this Carl Schmitt mode of thinking. The 3 of the 8 articles that I've highlighted. Number 6, NATO should commit itself to refrain from any further enlargement of NATO, including the accession of Ukraine as well as other states. NATO should not be interfering in the Russian civilizational space or Großraum. 7, NATO shall not conduct any military activity on the territory of Ukraine in our civilizational space. And most ambitiously of all, Article 4. NATO shall not deploy military forces and weaponry on the territory of any of the other states in Europe, in addition to any forces that were deployed as of May 1997. What does that mean? Well, this map shows the expansion of NATO, with Sweden and Finland currently waiting approval of all members of NATO to finally join. But what we're looking at here is NATO before 1997 in purple, and the states that joined NATO after 1997 in Central and Eastern Europe: Poland, the Baltic states, Romania, Czech Republic, and others. So Putin, in this draft treaty plan, was proposing to turn the clock back before NATO had entered its so-called civilizational space. The final point about Ukraine. Here we have 2 regular opinion polls. Support for Ukraine joining the EU on the left, support for Ukraine joining NATO on the right. We're most interested in the one on the right, Ukraine joining NATO. So look at causation here. 2009, big majority in Ukraine, 58%, was NATO skeptical. Only 20% were in favour of joining. Ukrainians want to join NATO because of the aggression against them. So fast forward to 2022, 71% want to join, 7% not. So causation is not the causation of Russia's imaginary world, according to which NATO expansion is a threat and they have to stop Ukraine becoming a member. For Ukraine's own perspective, Ukrainians have decided to want to join NATO because of the Russian threat against them. Everything that I've described in this lecture is not objective geopolitics. It's the geopolitics that Russia has come to believe in and has used as its justification for the war against Ukraine. That's the end of lecture 4. We've had 4 lectures mainly about Russia. The next 4 will be mainly about Ukraine and its thinking about the war and how Ukraine resists Russian aggression. Thank you for watching. Thank you for keeping going through the lecture series. We'd love to hear your comments and appreciate your likes.
Hi everyone, my name is Anton and I'm the president of the UCL Ukrainian Society. And I also happen to be the man behind the cameras and behind the editing. So I really do hope you are enjoying those lectures. I want to thank you for all your support, for your views, your likes, for your comments. This is something new for us, so I would really appreciate if you could help us to promote this course even more by sharing with your friends, your family, your colleagues, or maybe just someone you think would be interested in this. I hope you enjoy the next lecture and the ones to come.